Welcome to What CEOs Talk About. Do you wonder what CEOs talk about behind closed doors? How they bring their vision to reality? How do they overcome and succeed through adversity? We share that and so much more with each episode. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello and welcome to the podcast, What CEOs Talk About. If you are a regular listener, then you might think you're in the wrong place because you don't recognize this voice coming through your speakers right now. And that's true because I am your guest host, Ken Cameron. And today, the guest interview subject on What CEOs Talk About is your regular host, Martin Hunter. Martin, welcome to your own podcast.
I love you, man. That's awesome. Thank you very much for such a wonderful intro.
Martin, it's so great to have you here, but we should let our listeners know exactly why we've switched this roles and why we're switching things up. This is your 100th episode of your podcast. How do you feel about that? That is
correct. Is the answer to that. In awe, I have to admit, kind of matches the title. I can't believe that I've spoken to 100 people. It's actually, what did we say? 102, 103, something like that. But anyways, what started off as a trial during the pandemic has now become something of value where people seek us out to be interviewed. Which is, at first I was like, oh, it's an outreach. I can't fly anymore. Can't talk to people. Can't meet people like Ken in regular. I used to travel a lot. So it's given me the opportunity to speak with people around the globe that I would not necessarily would have had the opportunity through the pandemic.
Yeah, it really has been such a great way for people to reach out to one another. And your podcast, as you say, has become quite popular in a really short period of time. You've been doing it for 2 years. Is that what?
Not even. I think we started in February, not last year or the year before. So almost in February would be 2 years. So what's that? February minus, so almost 2 years.
And that means if you're at 100 episodes right now, then that means you've been clocking in one interview per week.
Well, we've been posting one interview per week, but now with the inbound, I mean, we've got, unfortunately, we have to kind of put people in the hopper where people, sometimes I had like 6 interviews in 1 week. And now the entire team is saying, well, maybe we should go to 2 interviews coming per week if the volume keeps coming up. Yeah. So yeah, something around there.
Well, that's just like quite the commitment. I just want to kind of take a moment at your 100th anniversary here to just kind of acknowledge that that's a huge commitment. I was a guest on your podcast. I run a podcast myself that I work with run with my colleague, and we only do it every 2 weeks, and it's tough for us to just keep that momentum going. So you're doing like twice, 3 times, 4 times the clip. So I just want to take a moment for me and our listeners and you to just acknowledge what that takes.
My wife and kids know when I've recorded more than one podcast. I come out of the office and I am gassed. I am absolutely, I mean, during the episodes when I record, I give the guest 100% of attention. It's not pre-scripted. It's long form. I'm purposefully curious. And most of the time we meet each other for the very first time because I want to stay curious. So I really pay attention. And because it's 2D, there's body language that I want to pick up on, and I truly pay attention to make the conversation around them, because I think that is, having been on multiple podcasts, there are some podcasts who have their agenda and they're using their guests as a vector to confirm what the podcaster stands for, right? So whatever the podcaster's message, they're using the guest as a vector for what they want to promote or engage. Whereas what CEOs talk about, we use the same way, but we reverse it, where what CEOs talk about is the vector for whatever they want to talk. When Ken and Russell were on their show, It was all about them. It was can't recall the title of the show, but we talked about your book, we talked about your services, we talked about what you truly and honestly believe in. And I believe that in the long format, it is all about the guest, and how that's how I feel that it should be.
Thank you. That's a really great point because, and I really want to pick up on a term you used, purposefully curious, because in preparation for me being your guest host, I took the opportunity to listen to a number of your older podcasts. And one of the things that really stuck out to me was that you were purposefully curious, that you were interested in the guests, you were interested in what they had to say, and that you let them guide the conversation. So I think it's a great phrase that you've used.
Thank you. I mean, I truly, I force myself when I say how you doing, I really mean it. And in any way, shape, or form, I want to be treated the way that, or I treat people the way that I want to be treated. So if I want to make sure that somebody is engaged, I mean, if I mean the question, how are you doing, means that, hey, listen, I really want to know how you're doing.
Well, let's
And
try that
so
right now, Martin. How are you doing today?
I could be better. I could be
Okay.
better.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your transparency. What's behind that statement?
As as we embark in a different journey for what CEOs talk about, I'm now put in a position where I came to realize today that I came here without a plan. And that kind of puts me in a place where I tell people for with URGEO, the money making machine that I lead and manage, I've always had a plan. And for with CEOs, it's kind of like, oh wow, I've brought it all the way up here. Okay, now smartass, what are you going to do with the next, 100 episode? Is there, it's nice to get to talk to people, but how are you going to use this opportunity and gift that you have to really leverage it and make the world a better place? I know it sounds super ridiculous, but I mean, you gotta, I was given the gift of curiosity. How am I going to use it to make the world a better place? Right.
That's a good question. That's a good question. Do you have an answer for that now? How are you going to make the world a better place?
Through my powers of question, I think I don't think I know that as we as we look at more influence, what CEOs talk about, the opportunity to be a messenger of goodwill and good hope should be leveraged, meaning that conversation should be around sustainability, inclusivity. It should be around proper capitalism. It should be around how do we leverage consumer habits and comfort for the betterment of humanity, the planet, everything. How do I use my gift and the voice that I've created here to make things better? So if people are listening, if they can take one piece of advice and say, hey, listen, I can do that. So if we're influencing one individual, one CEO to make a better, sustainable, and prosperous choice for his business, that means that if he employs, let's say, 50 people, that's 50 families. And so, if you go down the line, I know it sounds a little bit ridiculous. If we can, influence the power of choice by having honest, critical conversation that are kind, compassionate, and objective, isn't that philanthropy? Isn't that how you use your gift to make the world a better place?
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. And those themes that you picked up are really interesting to me because one of the things I asked you to do in preparation for this podcast was to choose some of your favorite podcasts out of the last 100 that we did. And it was a bit of a trick question. We'll get to that in a second, but I'm identifying out of the 4 that you sent me, those themes kept popping up. So we're going to, over the course of this podcast, refer to those 4 that you chose. And we'll also talk about why you chose them and why they're not specifically favorites. I'm going to put quotation marks around that. But I got a couple of leading questions for you before we even get to that kind of just to kind of set the stage. And the first question is this: you always ask your guests to choose the title of that particular episode. Why?
Oh shit, I don't know. I think it was, I always like to put what I call meat in the middle. And I mean that in how do we meet in the middle? How do we put the meat in the middle of the sandwich as well? Which is kind of, how do I get the most out of my guest? I've never seen the individual before. They've maybe listened to an episode or two. How do I create trust? How do I provide them with the opportunity to get on their soapbox and say whatever? So by drawing their emotions to a level of, okay, I'm given an opportunity to say whatever I want, to talk about me, to talk about what I care about. So therefore, they're courageous and vulnerable, and therefore we can build trust a lot faster. And it's their show. It's my framework, but it's really, the hour is theirs. That's my gift to them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. And so I thought it was just sheer laziness, but in fact, it's you've got a real strategy behind it.
It was lazy at first, I have to admit. What are we going to talk about? Well, what's your title? What do you want to talk about?
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. I have empathy for you. I'm my first career was in the world of theater. I spent 25 years as a playwright, theater director. I got to tell you, I have not named most of my plays. My wife has provided the titles for most of my plays because she's really good at titles. I happen to be really good at plot and character and dialogue, but I suck at titles. So I let her do most of the title choosing. So I wondered if it was the same place.
I wanted to ask you the same thing. So I've been, kind of pushed and forced into writing a book, and I keep writing and writing and writing. I was like, no, that's not the title. I keep writing and writing. Oh, that's not the title. I keep writing and writing, and that's not. I hear you. It's very difficult. When we picked what CEOs talk about, it was around beers. The whole team was sitting down, and one of my good friends was sitting. It was a Friday afternoon, and we're talking about the show, and just the stupidest ideas were coming out. And one of our marketing team, she said, Martin, when you talk to CEOs, what do you guys talk about? Like, what do CEOs talk about? And everybody kind of got up at the same time, and they said, that's it. That's the title of the show. What do CEOs talk about? And and then we're like, oh yeah, that sounds really, really good. And so, to your point, there was I can't remember what we had started with, but it was so bad we can't even remember.
No, that's great. There's a lot of people speak disparagingly of decision by committee, but that's an instance in which decision by committee actually matters and actually works. And it sounds as if you did it exactly the right way. It wasn't so much that the committee was deciding, but you let the decision sit amongst the group until it landed in the right place.
I enjoy creativity, and I think that to be able to be creative, and that's the hard part that I'm struggling with right now, is that I'm being asked to be creative and to create content. And as you know, you're a master creator. You've been creating for the most part of your life. How do you create on demand is very difficult. It is very, very difficult to create on demand. And I think the show permits us to be creative without having to put, to come back to your laziness, without having to put a whole bunch of, what are we going to talk about? Let's get people from leadership. Let's get people from sales and marketing. We're like, no, let's just get kick-ass CEOs and world leaders and leaders in their own domain, and just give them a voice, give them an opportunity to be there. And I think that is innovative and creative on its own.
Nice. Okay, here's the next question. I suspect that your regular listeners will have picked up pieces of your personal biography over the course of a number of episodes, however they may have listened to, but probably in that kind of random order that often happens to us when we're sitting down for beers with people. And it's like, wait a minute, when did that happen? When was this? Like, wait, was that before or after? Kind of a thing. And there also may be listeners who this could be their first episode or only their second episode, so they may not have any context at all. So let's provide some of that background. I want you to tell me your entire life story from start until the end of today in less than 5 minutes. Okay, on your mark, get set, go.
East Coast Canada, born fishing village close to Yarmouth in Nova Scotia. Okay. Fishing went down in the 80s, moved to Montreal, My mom's French, Acadian French. Moved to Montreal because we knew people there. Joined the military, 17 years old, traveled the world, kind of did some really, really cool stuff there. First marriage was kind of rocky, so moved. I was posted in Ottawa. Got divorced, almost met my new wife there, moved to Japan, spent some time because my first wife left me when it was through 9/11 back in the day. So it's pretty harsh. Had to kind of do a full reset. Moved to Calgary, came back to Canada with my new wife that was originally from Ottawa, that met me in Calgary, that met me in Japan, moved to Calgary, worked at Shell, traveled, fell in love with oil and gas, mining, trades, started URGEO, went to New Caledonia, where my first daughter with my new wife was born. That's in the South Pacific. URGEO was started, safety, security, operational excellence kind of evolved, traveled the world, lived and worked on 6 different continents. Version 2.0 of URGEO started about 5 years ago, started really focusing on operational excellence from corporations to small, medium enterprises, started building and selling companies. URGEO has now evolved to a group of people that is larger than me, but less than 50. I say that because it fluctuates depending on the projects that we have, but usually at the core, we've got about 12 people. And then started the podcast, and here we are. So now I'm invested in 4 major activities in life. That's not including my family. As we've got URGEO, which is the money generating, operational excellence firm. We really help businesses either sell, merge, scale. That's number 1. Number 2 is what CEOs talk about. Number 3 is UltraVest, where I am the chair of the Vancouver chapter, where we helped underserved charities find right board members. And lastly is the BC Barbarians Rugby Academy. I'm a big rugby guy. My kids love rugby, and they don't get enough out of the establishments that we have in Canada, and therefore you have to seek, kind of private coaching and stuff. So I decided to do my own, and I think that's under 5 minutes.
It's definitely under 5 minutes. And you ended with rugby there, but I didn't catch that earlier. Did you play rugby yourself in university?
Oh, I did. I did. Oh my goodness. Yeah. I started ripe old age. I can't remember, like 8 or 9. I was Gavin's age. Played around the world, had fun, plenty of injuries. My nose bends when it shouldn't bend. My ear doesn't bend when it should bend. But when you die and go to heaven, you wake up, you play rugby, you drink a Guinness, you eat steak and frites, and then you fall asleep and you wake up, you play rugby, and then you drink Guinness, and then you eat steak, freaking. That's what you do in heaven, is you play rugby, drink beer, and eat steak and frites.
Nice.
No vegetables.
Yeah, that would be the rugby. That would be the rugby way. That's right. And did you remind me? Did you play semi-professionally, or was it all just
yeah, absolutely. Okay. So there was lots of opportunities both on the player side and the coach side that led me to kind of the level of rugby that I'm at today, which is really cool. I get to help young athletes be the best that they can be. It's not just because of my kids, because rugby takes 15 or 7 to, depending on what type of rugby you're playing with. If I just focus on my kids, they'll be great. They'll be very talented. They'll be the only one talented in a group of 15, which is not fair. So why not bring a couple of other kids? And rugby in Canada, for some reason, is you have to have a lot of money. You have to go to the private schools to be able to get the good rugby. We want to make rugby accessible to any kid who is ready to work hard. That's it. That. There's no skill requirements. Just if you, at the BC Barbarians, we don't believe in miracles. We believe in hard work. So.
And we can drill a little bit into your Army career as well. What were your roles? Like, what were your ranks through the Army? What was the areas you worked in?
If I have to tell you, I have to kill you. No.
We'll just leave it at that then. Leave it at that, because there's a lot of people listening. I don't want you to have to track them all down.
No, I started young. went through the ranks. Went to I started as armored. That was my recruitment, and then after that, went in different areas of expertise like demolition, first aid. What else? My really finalized and finished with my what took me to civilian world is nuclear, biological, chemical warfare. So that was my speciality. That took me around the globe and planet, and really led me to leaving the military to work for Health Canada within the Nuclear Preparedness and Response Division.
Yeah, that's important work. It's also high stakes work. How did that land with you through that time? Did you have trouble both in the Army and then afterwards? How did you manage those high stakes on your shoulders?
PTSD, like real PTSD, and big trauma, little trauma. I'm not making fun of people who have, a trauma is a trauma. But when you bury children, that are 4, 6, 7, 8 years old, and you bury 14 of them in Bosnia, it messes with your brain. And so when you come back to the normal world and other stuff, being shot at, shooting at people, you come back to the normal world and somebody freaks out because their coffee is not hot enough. The trauma is very different. And back in the day, it was suck it up, buttercup. PTSD was not the same thing or it's not treated the same way as it was. And I mean, I did not go to Afghanistan like the new age warriors that we have today. But when you think about going back and forth, 2, 3 tours, I mean, that can compound heavily. And so that's one of the areas that I really want to add value as well, is help some of our younger veterans that have those issues.
Thanks for telling us a little bit about that. I know that PTSD is hard. My wife's a therapist. She works with people who have both situational PTSD and complex PTSD. I've heard through her work rather than witnessed it firsthand, but heard through her work just how hard that can be. And so I just take a moment to thank you for sharing that with us and with the listeners, because that's not easy to talk about. Even just talking about it is not easy. So thanks for taking the time to do that on behalf of all of us.
Thank you. It's taken a while. It took a long time for me to be able to talk about it and to not get angry with people who had little traumas, right? And Tracy, my wife, who tells me all the time, she says, there is nobody else that I would rather have to lean to during an emergency. With all the stuff that I've seen through nuclear emergencies, in the mining industry, being shot at, in, making sure that safety was done. 9/11, I was working for the nuclear power plants across Canada when 9/11 hit. That was a pretty big situation. So you put things, the benefit of it is, I'd like to put the golden lining on all of this, is that when little stuff happens, I don't fret. So there's more kind of like, hey, you know what? It's not that bad. Nobody's going to die. It's not brain surgery. We'll deal with it. Let's have a systematic approach. And I think, URGEO was born out of my military career and how to address certain things, right? How do we systematically approach and ensure that we have process accountability and functional accountability for anything? Our basic assessment, it's called organizational readiness assessment. Like, how ready are you? It's like combat readiness. It's no different.
Yeah. And, you've given us a little segue there into the first of the podcasts that we wanted to talk about. So just to remind our listeners, I asked you if you could choose some of the notable podcasts that you've, out of the 100 podcasts that you've done. I loved your response to me. Your response was, this is an impossible task. How can I choose any of them? What's the criteria? What do you mean favorite? And, you tore a strip off of me via email. Like, what do you mean favorite? Define favorite. How does favorite work? What is favorite? However, I made these choices. So you gave me not just 3, but 3 plus 1, which I appreciate. So We'll get through these. But the first one that you're kind of leading us towards in your comments was put your mask on first, with your guest, Ryan Hindmarsh. Yeah. And one of the things that Ryan talked about was he talked about the importance of rest and self-care. And he used that analogy that all of us have heard on the airplane, where the stewardess tells you that in case of emergency, the mask will drop from the ceiling. You are to put your mask on first before you help somebody else. Now, just remind us quickly, Martin, why do we put our own mask on first before somebody else's?
You put your mask on first so that you can act and address other issues without having to be in distress. So you put your mask on first so that you are capable of not just helping, but ensuring that you have a means to sustainably address other issues.
Right. Yeah, and that makes sense on the surface of it. We all can nod in, with our fingers steepled together, and we can all nod sagely at the wisdom of that comment. And then 99% of us will turn around and not follow that advice. We'll work too hard. We'll overwork ourselves. We'll work ourselves into the bone, and then we'll be short-tempered with those who are with us. So, how do you take care of yourself before you take care of others? What do you do to rest, refuel, and recharge so that you're at your best when you're with your family or with your employees or colleagues?
That is the one thing that one of the reasons why I picked that one is because that's the one that I struggle the most with. It is very difficult for a person who has chosen service as their backbone to put themselves first. And I picked that one because that's the one that I struggle. Like when you ask, how am I feeling today? I've got surgery coming up and I've not been as diligent on my working, on my eating habits. I always put everybody first. I always seek to be useful. And that is something that I truly and honestly struggle with. And Ryan does it in such a beautiful way that he's demonstrated year over year that self-care is not selfish. And that is one of the reasons why I love that episode, because it is something that I continuously, as much as I know, as much as I have a morning routine, I will always want to do more of. And I always feel that oftentimes I put my health and wellness aside for the betterment of others. And that's my superpower, but also my kryptonite.
Well, it's often true that our superpower is also our super weakness, right? Like, Superman, to use your analogy, Superman is super strong, but as soon as he's confronted with kryptonite, he becomes weak as a kitten. Right. Batman, he doesn't have a superpower, but his superpower is his focus and how driven he is. And it's also what destroys him. Right. So these are the things that are our Spider-Man's superpower is not so much the ability to climb walls as his dedication to others. And of course, that's what gets him into the most trouble. So you sound like the Peter Parker type who, you're looking after others.
I'm just 50 years older than he is, and about 100 pounds heavier too. I don't know if the web would hold my weight.
That's right. Right. Tell me about it. Well, if you're then let's look at it from the flip side then. So how do you as a leader help your employees at URGEO to take care of themselves? What is it that you advise others to do? What's the do as I say, not as I do message that you leave your employees?
I still do well. I think I do well. Like my coach says, she says, I am not kind enough. I do plenty to take care of myself. I work out every day. I walk. It is just my level of expectation is far too high. Our third value at URGEO is well-grounded. So one of the areas that we do not want to go through is we do not want to go over 27 people, because if we go over 27 people, it puts us in a gross revenue situation where the profitability will be lost to adding complexity to the organization. So we want to stay boutique enough that core value of being well-grounded. I don't give a shit where you live on the planet, as long as you do your work. You want to do like a lot of people through the summer that we just passed, did work from different locations. People took to the skies again. They went to Manhattan. They went to the Hamptons. They went to Florida. They went to PEI, and they all worked from different locations, enjoying their time with their families, but also putting in, 3 to 4 hours a day to the expectation of the organization. So we create an environment that is, we treat people with dignity and respect, and we treat them like adults.
Do you
with
give
maturity.
them the space do you give them encouragement for self-care, for health and wellness? Did
It's
you,
part of performance management.
okay. So it's something you measure them on. It's something you ask them about and talk to them
Absolutely.
about. Okay. Yeah.
It's something that my COO holds me accountable and says that I'm terribly poor at. Um, I don't take enough vacation.
Mm.
I don't give myself time to be creative, although I provide that to all others that work for URGEO. Again, you see, completely, hence putting your mask on first, that I don't do so well.
Sounds like I want to come work for you. Sounds interesting. In that episode with Ryan, you offered up your definition of leadership. And I wanted to ask you now, in the weeks, months since you recorded that episode, just thinking about it today, what's your definition of leadership today?
Our job is to provide direction, facilitation, elevation, and celebration. That is your duty of care. So you have the duty of care to provide direction, to facilitate the work, to elevate the individual's skills, knowledge, and experience, and celebrate both wins and fails with the respect that both of them deserve on either side. Because there are some beautiful mistakes. We have to admit sometimes people mistakes that lead to better behaviors, better understanding. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and a mistake needs to be celebrated. And that is your job as the leader, is to create that environment of physical, mental, and emotional safety.
I want to challenge you to give me an example of that. Can you tell me about an mistake that occurred with one of your employees or one of your contractors around URGEO, or maybe you want to go back somewhere else in your past for confidentiality reasons, however you want to approach this. Tell me about a conversation you had where somebody had made a mistake, and you had to use that as a learning opportunity.
As soon as I say beautiful mistake, everybody within URGEO will know what I'm talking about. We had a client, or part of a client, somebody that we viewed as a client, wanted to work for URGEO in some capacity, but wanted to test. That person felt that they could do more, that they did not feel challenged enough, and wanted to experience what it was to be in operational excellence. And so the agreement was, hey, listen, don't tell your boss, just give it a try. I've got a couple of projects that you can work on part-time. If you like it, then, or if you don't like it, no skin, no foul, no hurt. You just go back to doing it. We've not told anybody, and you're not losing any points with your boss. If you like it, then we talk to your boss and say, hey, listen, this is what you want. This is how you want it. Let's work out a deal that's beneficial to both of you, so that, both of you can still feel comfortable in going forward together in the relationship. Well, I had a conversation on a Tuesday morning, I think it was. Wednesday morning, I get a call from that particular client who said, they said, I had a conversation. I couldn't hold myself back. I told my boss. And I was like, what? You told your boss? We didn't even agree on the contracts. That person said, well, I can't, I couldn't hold it in. I couldn't hold it in. And to this day now, that person is well ingrained in URGEO, loves what they do, have created a beautiful, prosperous business model for the client, and has just leaps and bounds within URGEO.
So a happy accident in that the person just leapt in with both feet. And
didn't follow the plan, and it's a beautiful accident. And that's the first thing that we talked about, and saying, hey, you fucked up. I know. I was all right. How do we fix it?
Nice. I mean, I suppose to some extent that's what you want in an employee, somebody who's so enthusiastic about working with you that they're willing to go all in. But at the same time, you also want an employee who's going to actually like follow the plan that you've outlined.
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm not religious at all, but how does it say in the Bible, who has not failed to throw the first rock? I mean, everybody messes up. So
yeah, sure.
and
sure,
again,
right.
nobody has died. There's no brain surgery. So really, what's the impact?
Yeah, sure. There was the second of the 3+1 episodes that you pointed us towards was I'm not a CEO. I just work really, really hard. With your guest, Ute, help me with her last name, Ute Press?
Prius.
Yes. Prius. Ute Prius. Her title, the title of the episode she chose was I'm not a CEO. I just work really, really hard. And she chose that title, she says, because she was reluctant to call herself a CEO because she associates that with someone who is pale, male, and stale. And so as somebody who is pale and male, how does this land with you?
It was a conversation around fixed mindset. And, we talk about it. It was so funny because in one of the meetings, one of our marketing persons said, I had to do a presentation to these crusty old 50-year-old guys. And then kind of everybody on the Zoom call you could see that they're all looking at that person and then looking at me, looking at that person and looking at me, looking at that person and looking at me. And like somebody stepped up and said, that Martin's 50 and he's what? And she's like, yeah, what is different with him? It's really different. So I said, let's not put a color, age, or race on a fixed mindset. What you're saying is that those individuals are closed-minded. They're not ready and willing to let go of those situations. So for me, it was how beautiful it was that she was everything that she wanted to be at a high level, but yet did not want to associate yourself with a position that she deserved because she thought there was a negative connotation attached to it. And that for me was one of the beauty of things, is that a lot of people have the right attitude, skill, knowledge, experience, and energy to be the lead, but choose not to because they're not courageous enough to be able to break the stigma or want to break the stigma.
Well, tell me about a time then in your professional career. You gave us the whole long biography at the beginning of the episode. Pinpoint a time in that timeline when you didn't have the courage to step into a space that someone else was creating for you. When did you find yourself reluctant to step into the spotlight?
I don't think it's ever happened.
Okay.
In lack of leadership, I've always taken the lead. I don't think that's ever... I can tell you about a story where I had to break friendship because of my leadership position, where I had to be very courageous. And so I hired a new, back in New Caledonia when we were working in the mining industry, brought in a young, dynamic executive assistant. And one of my senior officers was a good friend. So him and I were good friends. He's military as well. His wife and my wife were friends, and our kids were friends. So we're pretty attached to this family. And during a meeting, he pipes up and tells her in front of 20 other people, why are you being so I'm not going to use all the profanity I used, but it was very disrespectful and attacked her. And so I kind of paused it and I said, hey, man, using his first name. I said, okay, everybody out. And I said, what are you doing? Why are you attacking? Well, this little bitch came in and she can't tell. She's like, hold on. She's not challenging you. She's challenging the task. So it's a conflict task, not a personality class. No, she's telling us that we're worthless. That's not what she's saying. So anyways, this goes on and said, hey, listen, I'm going to bring her back in. You need to apologize. I'm not apologizing. I said, hey, friend, like, you need to apologize. You did this in a public environment in front of a lot of people. You have to apologize. There's a lot invested in this. And he wouldn't. So I said, okay, I'll give you till tomorrow. Take a break, go take a breather, bring everybody out. I apologized, come back. Next morning, I said, you have to apologize. I'm not apologizing. So I'm letting you know that if you don't apologize, I'm going to have to put a written warning with you with HR. You're going to do that? You're going to jeopardize our friendship? No, you're jeopardizing our friendship. And so it went on, and we had to fire him. So my wife lost a good friend. My kids lost friends in a place where friendships are far and few between. And so I had to stand by my leadership for the betterment of the organization, to my own and family's detriment.
Thank you for sharing that story. That must have been hard when you were so close with that individual.
Very hard, very hard. And I think that I had, 60 other two souls on that ship that I had to take care of.
There's something else I'm hearing in this story that I think we can pluck out around leadership. You mentioned this other individual, your business partner, had also been in the military. And I think we can contrast his view of how he views hierarchy and loyalty and what those terms mean to him. And we can contrast with what those terms mean to you, because it's clear you have two very different interpretations of hierarchy and loyalty.
Well said. Well said. Absolutely. And I think that for me, hierarchy means that, yes, you have more responsibilities and therefore more rights or more liberties to be able to enact on those responsibilities. But with more rights, how does Spider-Man say it? With greater responsibility, with greater powers come great responsibilities. Let's bring it back to Spider-Man. On the other hand, not to the detriment of the troops. At any point in time, regardless of how high ranking you are within an organization, the person who holds the rifle, the person who works on the shop floor, is the one that's generating action. We are just there to support them. So the people at the ground do care, like that duty of care that I talk about. You are responsible to make sure that they have right direction, they're facilitated, they're elevated, they're taken care for. They have to have a safe mental, physical, and emotional workplace. And you can't compromise that, no matter how much your emotions are going to be torn. Your job as leaders to create that safety and keep that safety.
And at the outset of this little subsection here of the story, you mentioned that as a leader, you've never been afraid to step into that space when you were asked to. And that's another thing that I've discovered as a non-military person that's so much essential of military thinking, is that everyone is poised to become a leader when the person in front of them falls or retires or steps down or, God forbid, gets shot. Then it's your job to step into that space. And again, that's around hierarchy, is that everyone's ready to move into that space. And it sounds like your business colleague didn't have that attitude, that for him, it's about, this is my space, you stay out of it.
Yeah, I perfectly. Ken, you couldn't have put it better. And I didn't even think about that. But yeah, that's absolutely true. It's, I mean, the way that I grew up in the military was very different than the way he grew up, where he grew up in the regular soldiers. So where I grew up in a more SF special forces area, where everybody has the same right to say, hey, this is not the right way. Now, the commanding officer and the non-commissioned officer have the final say. Most of the time in SF, you have a very small working group to where you collaborate and cooperate and say, okay, well, how do we? So the difference in between regular enlisted and SF is that in SF, there's a lot more collaboration between where, 1 + 1 = 3, where in the regular enlisted, it's more cooperative. I do my part, you do your part, and then we just add everything together, and then it just becomes bigger and badder in sheer numbers. That's kind of the different mindset from most people.
Makes sense. Speaking of mindset, in that same episode, you and Ute talk about, you drop a catchphrase: leaders are learners, not readers. And I thought that was a really interesting catchphrase. And I wanted to get you to tell me more about why that's become a little mantra for you.
I'm dyslexic. So my daughter's dyslexic. And there's this new age of reading books amongst CEOs, and a lot of people say, well, CEOs are readers. Well, leaders are readers. Well, what happens to the people who are dyslexic, like Branson, like me, like my daughter? I created a leadership or a learning methodology that was not um, academic in the purest form. For me, reading is very, very difficult. Writing is very, very difficult. So when you look at a math problem where you have to read what the equation says, it's very difficult. If you draw me and you tell it to me, I'll be able to extrapolate the solution a lot faster than you will, just because of how my brain works. So I think it comes out in the episodes as well, where I'm continuously curious. And curiosity is to learn. Like my boy asked me, you know, I did a post on LinkedIn about a month ago or 2 months ago, beginning of summer, I can't remember, where he asked me, he says, Dad, do slugs have babies or do they lay eggs? And I'm like, that's a good question. I don't know. And so instead of going on Google and asking, I said, let's do research. Let's go to the library. Let's make effort to learn this thing. And so we went to the library. We thought, you know, we found out about invertebrates and how things and how their, you know, their sexuality is very different than most mammals that we know and we understand. And him and I learned not just about it, but how to learn and how to learn together. So for me, learning is continuous. Who am I to tell people, although I might have better skills and more education or more experience in a certain area, and I'm the boss, aka leader, doesn't mean that I always have the best ideas. So to be able to learn from others, or the gift of vulnerability and courage as a leader to let other people teach you, I think is a gift as a leader you should never let go of.
And I think I'm still gobsmacked at the thought of a parent who, instead of plopping their son in front of the internet and saying, look this up on Google, you actually took the child to a library, like with books. And a dyslexic parent took their child to a library with books and did the research together as an activity of engagement. I'm astonished at this kind of parenting. I didn't realize it still existed.
The library or the parenting?
Both.
I did not. You know, my boy is a lot better at finding books through the bibliography system than I am. He's like, Dad, it's so easy. Look, this is this. I was like, oh, you go, boy. You tell me which ones we should look at.
Mm-hmm. You know, you've been talking a fair bit about your children here, which reminds me that in the next two episodes that I want to talk about, again, I remind our readers that I asked you for 3, you gave me 4. So we're calling this 3+1 because the next 2 episodes were actually very similar to one another. You were looking at one episode that was It Takes Intentional Solutions for Intentional Problems with Jason. And then there was another episode with a somewhat similar title, or sorry, somewhat similar subject matter, very different title, which was If You Don't Have Inclusivity, You Have Nothing by Kat Polanski. And I wanted to, so they both dealt with equity, diversity, inclusion. They both dealt with inclusivity. They both dealt with issues around that. And in both episodes, you talk about your daughter. You talk about your daughter who is wants to be an engineer, and this frightened you. Tell me more. Tell our listeners more.
Ariel is dyslexic. She wants to be an engineer. And when you look at the statistics of female engineers, very low. The mindset behind the engineering schools is very fixed and closed. And although we are in 2022, some of the selection process is very archaic. And I, who is drawn by being useful and in lack of leaderships take control, I was like, I will not stand by the sidelines and let this happen to her and blame anybody else. So what can I do? So I've been on a mission to make sure that there is equality, diversity, and inclusion. And in those episodes, I found out that not all are equal. That when you try to fix diversity with diversity, you're not fixing anything, because what you're doing is you're just adding fire or oil to the fire and saying, well, if I'm going to hire somebody black because we don't have enough black people, then the white people are going to say, well, you're just hiring him because he's black. And the black person is going to say, well, you're just hiring me because I'm black. How does that help the situation? Right? And you can apply that same principle to women. Well, you're just hiring me. The term inclusivity means that I don't give a shit what color you are. I don't give a shit about if you're female or not female. But let's be intentional in making sure that we have an inclusive organization. And with Jason, it was really about, if you are short in black people within your organization, then be intentional in where you're going to recruit. Too often at times in organizations, Ken, who do you know? Well, you say, well, I know Russell. Russell's a good friend of mine. Okay, great. Well, it just happens to be like that because we're not intentional in seeking out, okay, so where do we go? Where can we put recruits? Where can we put feelers out there to be intentional in bringing more black males into our organization? Where do we reach out to make sure that we have female engineers lined up for the next engineering job? And that for me was, okay, I need to start talking about this. I need to start acting about this. I need to start influencing people about this. What do I have and what am I capable of using? What is my toolbox? What do I have in my toolbox to be able to create a path for Ariel to not be stigmatized and not just for her, but for any other girl who wants to be an engineer? How do I use and I'll use the second part of this, I'm going to keep on talking, sorry, is I found out that, I took offense when I first started, when we first started hearing the word, well, privileged, being born in an area where I would always make fun. I say, we're poor. What do you mean you're poor? I mean, we're so poor, we can't afford the R at the end of poor. So we're just poo. And so you get the point. And so I worked my ass off to get what I wanted. And what Kat did is she changed my perspective. She said, hey, Martin, has nothing to do with the effort. And everybody recognizes the effort that you've done. It's just, if you're a white male and you walk up to 3 doors, all 3 doors will open. If you walk up to those doors and you're a black man, only 2 doors will open. And if you walk up to that door and you're a black female, no doors will open. Has nothing to do with the amount of effort that you've put. It's just that you've worked really hard, but the doors have opened. So I'm going to use my white, middle-aged, crusty, call it whatever you want, privilege to slam down, kick down, and open doors and be useful and bring everybody that's behind me in a way that is inclusive. And that's what I want to do. I'm a big bull. Let's charge it down.
And so, one of the things that came to my mind when I was listening to your conversation with Jason Mercer in It Takes Intentional Solutions for Intentional Problems was around this notion of equity, diversity, and inclusion. It came up also in the other podcast with Kat, but it just reminded me very much of a quote from Verna Myers, who's the CEO of Diversity and Inclusion at Netflix. And I'm going to butcher her quote. I'm going to butcher her analogy a little bit, but it's something along the lines of, diversity means making sure everybody is invited to the party. Equity means everybody gets a drink in their hand when they get there. But inclusion means making sure that they're on the planning committee beforehand.
That is so beautiful. That is absolutely well said.
Again, not my quote. But
yeah, but still, it doesn't matter. That is well said.
So here's my question then to you, Martin, is what are you and URGEO doing to put people on the planning committee?
We had a young lady who was part of our marketing team who was about to have a baby. And she
Is this the
had,
same woman who called you pale, male, and stale? Is it?
no, she did not. She did not. This was another one.
Okay.
And she was about to have a baby. And it's funny because we're having conversations about her within the leadership team. And the leadership team had very inclusive. And so I'm like, okay, the women on the leadership team were saying, oh my goodness, this lady's got baby brain. She's forgetting things, and not in a bad way, but this individual wanted to work till the most that she could work to make sure that she got, all of her benefits and stuff like that. And I said, hey, listen, I think we should tell this individual that we'll pay for the rest, because she's making some mistakes that I know she wouldn't make if she wasn't pregnant and 8.5 weeks pregnant, right? Let's give her 2 weeks off. Everybody's like, yeah, absolutely. The women were like, I said, so, hey, how about we have a women committee on at URGEO? And then I heard crickets. And I was like, okay, what did I say wrong? And they said, well, why would we want to have a women's committee, Martin? Well, I don't know what it's like to have a baby. Like, I'm curious. I want to know. I want to make sure that everybody's empowered to do that. And I said, Martin, look around you. I was like, okay. It says half of the leadership team are women. Do we have a place at the table in decision making? I said, well, I turned the question around. I said, well, do you feel like it? And they said, absolutely 100%. So we don't need a women's committee. We are part of the leadership team. And I'm like, wow. Okay. So that was the end of the conversation, and said, we will address any pregnancy, may it be male or female, of, if it's a father or a woman who's having a baby, and we'll take care of it, because we are still a boutique firm, and if we will address it as they come up. We will not write a standard operating procedure. The standing operating procedures is, if that situation ever occurs, we bring it to the table and we discuss it. And so inadvertently, through my background of letting everybody at the round table, was demonstrated there. And the one place that I feel that we are lacking at URGEO is really in diversity. So we don't represent all cultures, and that is a bit harder in boutique work and in the areas that we're working. So we are being intentional on our recruitment, and it is difficult sometimes to in that specific area. We are intentional, but it's not easy finding the right candidates to be able to fill the requirements without diluting the quality of the delivery. So that is something that we are struggling with. So.
And in acknowledging that you're struggling with it, there's an element of moving forward and addressing it by virtue of the fact
continuously. Yeah. We're always saying, so for example, if we had enough in diversity. It's just that the projects that we had all kind of fell. And so we're trying to figure out, how do we add more diversity to the leadership team? And that's not easy when there's not a lot of traction. Where projects are there's a start and a finish, right? And so we're looking, and there's no other positions available or ready to hire right now. So we're just kind of saying, okay, the next ones need to be very intentional on our search.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Right. Like, it's interesting to hear how how you're planning to go about that, and how you're being intentional about that at various levels, and also where you're really, really clear on where the weaknesses lie as a small organization.
Oh, who am I to tell other people how they run their business if I would not be transparent and clear that our business is not perfect. Our business is growing. Our business is always looking to seek improvement and become better. We're just really, really good at scaling businesses as a whole. Doesn't mean that we're perfect. We're just a lot better than the average.
And and there's strength too in being able to have a workforce that reflects the kinds of clients you want to attract and the kinds of clients you want to be approaching. You work internationally, you work with international companies, so you want to be reflective of that and open to that, right? So, in what other ways do you? Because there's other ways to interpret diversity as well. I mean, when we say the word diversity, 90% of the time people are talking about cultural diversity, but there's also intellectual diversity, diversity of thought, and diversity of ideas, diversity of background and experience. So, and by background and experience, I mean literally like work background and work experience. So, how do you reach out to and make space for those other kinds of diversity within your organization?
It's when we look at a job, and I use the kind of the linguistic air quotes for job, we tend to focus on functional accountability and process accountability. So we don't write a job description. We say, what's the attitude, skill, knowledge, experience, energy, and time commitment that it takes to achieve this task? And we kind of fine tune that. And from there comes a regular job description, if you want to call it, that we do outreaches for. But we're very, very intentional on putting keywords that attract different people in different areas. So we'll go to our network in different areas and we'll say, hey, listen, without prejudice, here's where we want to expand the diversity. Here's the existing team that we have. And so we're looking for somebody who has this specific behavior. So we break it down into behaviors rather than job titles, because I mean, we are operators by nature. So we're not consultants. We're not strategics. We are operators. We operate businesses. And so therefore there's a certain attitude that, you have to want to get shit done. That's our number one core value. And so you got to want to move the bus. And second one is really demonstrate care. You have to care about people. So we, as much as we want diversity in thought, there are certain values that we will not bend for just the sake of inclusion. So we're very specific on that. People, the third core value is well-grounded. The fourth one is act on data. And the last one is learn and innovate. So if you're progressive, well, we can consider it learning and innovation. If you're, I don't know, there are certain things that we don't want to necessarily diverge from what we're good at. And this is coming out wrong. What I'm trying to say is that there's for what we need to deliver, we will not sacrifice quality of work just to fill diversity. It would be wrong towards the individual and wrong towards the clients in regards to that. And in all mindset. Oh, it's great to be diverse and you want to bring this and you want to bring inclusivity. Yeah, but we don't need we don't need 15 CFOs. We just need one. Yeah, but you'll get more insights if you have more people thinking about economical and fiscal situations. No, we won't. We just need one. So we're always mindful as an organization to be well balanced and also fine tuned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Excellent. And, and you have to be intentional about those things in so many ways. I mentioned earlier in the podcast that my first career was in the world of theater. I was a playwright. I wrote many plays that have been produced all across Canada. But what I discovered over the years of doing that was that if I just put in the character description, like Joe, a plumber, then Joe was always going to be a white plumber. Every director that picked up that script would cast a person that they knew. They'll cast, I know a guy, he looks the part. He looks like, because their vision of a guy who looks the part is Joe, a white plumber. So I started writing Joe, a black plumber, or Joe, a plumber of color, or whatever it might be. Yeah. So, or I would start like actively searching, like, I'm going to build into this. This is a character who is Iranian. So they have to find somebody who's Iranian or from at least that part of the world. And so that it gets embedded in their thinking, so that it's, because you have to be intentional about building these things. You want a plumber, great, but if you want it to be a plumber that has a particular background or character, then if that's important to me, then I have to build that into the blueprint from the beginning.
And I mean, when we first started off the partnership, that's exactly what we did with Greta and Andrea. Is like, okay, so we've got 4 white guys in the partnership. Whoa, this is not cool. Like, okay, so what are we going to do? Okay, so next 2 is we need to groom Andrea and Greta to be on, the team. Now, Greta is from Mexico. Andrea's here from Canada. She's white as well. So now we're like, okay, as a team, we're like, okay, well, let's bring in some diversity. What do we want in regards to, we're dealing a lot with companies in the Southern US. Would it not be nice to have somebody from the Southern US be part of the leadership team that understands the culture of the operators? Majority of the operating organization, their labor force could be up to, 80 to 90% Mexican or Black. So now we've got Greta, who is Mexican, and now we were seeking, and we had a gentleman who was Black as well. He moved on to a different position. And that's my point, is that the intentionality of inclusion needs to be, okay, well, just like you mentioned, they need to be invited on the committee to plan the party. There's just no better way to say it than that.
Nice. Thank you. We're drawing close to the end of our podcast. And so I want to circle back to a comment you made at the very beginning. And I'm going to pose you this question again. How will you use this podcast, What CEOs Talk About, in the future to make the world a better place over the next 100 episodes that you have coming up?
How you turned the words against me, Ken. I love you for it. Sustainability comes to mind. How do I use my voice? How do I use this show for people, for CEOs and company owners and founders to make not just a decision about transaction, but really a decision about how do I use my company to transform and to leave this place better than when we got it? And I think that's, if somebody can follow my lead, if we give, by interviewing all these people and we give them the opportunity to speak their piece, and if one listener who's a CEO who has 50 people that are part of their organization, and that individual, he or she makes a change that creates prosperity, that uses capitalism for good, that is beneficial for the oceans, for the planet, for humanity, to make the world a better place without losing comfort. We don't have to sacrifice comfort for making this world a better place. What we do have to sacrifice is our views of having to fill every second with something that is beneficial. I think that when people start realizing that doing nothing is sometimes doing better than doing something, just having a conversation. What does humanity need? What does the planet need? Let's create singularity of purpose and saying, okay, carbon emission, global warming, that's something we need to address. Humanity of taking the time to have a conversation, going to the restaurant, Ken and I, to sit down, have a beer and find out about each other. I think through storytelling, influence CEOs to make a decision that will impact their companies, and therefore the people that work for that organization to follow suit.
It's a great place to end this episode. That's a great vision to look forward to for the next, taking us through to like episode 200. It's a great place to end this episode. Thank you for being such a great guest, Martin. Thank you for being gracious enough to invite on a guest host. Thank you, listener, for staying with us through this episode. And that wraps up this episode. We hope that you enjoyed it. Remember to subscribe via Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Share the link with your friends. More importantly, share the link with somebody who you think is going to get something out of this episode, and with your colleagues. And remember, you can always reach out to Martin at the email address in the show, and we'll look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Thanks for tuning in to What CEOs Talk About. Make sure to click subscribe to get notified about future episodes, or check us out at www.whatceostalkabout.com.